What's up? What's up? So, how's it going on? Got two people on. My dude, how's it going? How you doing? Four people on now. So, today, I didn't realize this, but because I'm not a sports fan, but today is the Super Bowl. Man, that's crazy. If I would have known that, I wouldn't have done it today. But I already scheduled it, and I was like, literally going through the week, and I'm like, I feel like something's going on this weekend that I need to know about. And then on the news, they're like talking about the Super Bowl, and I'm like, oh, that's what's gonna happen. But you know, we're here now, so no big deal. We get people, we get people. We don't get people, and we don't get people. Can everybody hear me good? Hopefully, I don't know why, but it sounds like there's like some static in the mic or something from what I hear in here. So I don't know if it sounds like that for you all or not. All right, so I got a question in the chat. Let me go ahead and show it. It says, "What's going on? So how you doing? Uh, how can you get me to where I want to be and breeding breeder dragons? That is my sole purpose of watching you." All right. So breeding bearded dragons, essentially the thing about breeding bearded dragons is you always want to start with the cream of the crop, the best you can find with your budget. And the budget is really what's important because we'll get into it a little bit with some of the questions that were sent to me um, for this podcast. But essentially, for anyone ever wanting to ask any questions live or anything like that, you can always send me an email at info@qbsalesanddscales.com. The subject would be podcast questions, and I'll get them added to the podcast for the week. And but essentially, there's a lot that goes into getting the best of the best for your budget. So first, I need to know what your budget is, and if you really want to work one on one, I can do some one on one with you, and that would actually involve me telling you to get on my Patreon. My Patreon has videos. I also put any sales that I do for member specific sales that I do on Patreon. Um, Sometimes I only sell stuff on Patreon. I never actually sell it to the public. So if you want to get into breeding legit, like the right way, go and find my Patreon for $5 a month. You get all the videos and you get some one-on-one time with me. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm not trying to price gouge anybody. I just want to make sure that if they're serious about it, then they're at least serious enough to invest in their time. And that's essentially what it is. So let me go ahead and show this because we're talking about it already. Join my Patreon for exclusive videos and discounts. But yeah, not only do you get discounts and exclusive videos, you also do get a one-on-one. And one of the main things off Patreon, now that I'm talking about it, is every time you put money towards Patreon, unless you're in the $5 tier, if you go up higher, you get all the money back in credits to buy something. So let's say you're on the $20 tier and it's been 6 months, you have $120 you can spend on an animal whenever you feel like it. So if you wait 10 months, then you have $200. So it really depends on whenever you find something you like. And then you also get that discount for the $20 tier, which is I think 10% or something like that. Which, if you are looking at a $400 animal, you get 10% off. That's $40. You're looking at 360. You get $200 credit back from being a member. Now you're only having to pay 160 for a $400 animal. So it's almost like you're putting money towards a savings account. But again, that's only for certain tiers. It's not for the first $5 tier. But without further ado, we got a few people on here. So as always, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me go through my little spiel. Oh, somebody already has to leave. Oh man. Let me go through my little spiel. So, welcome to episode 2 of the Tip to Scales podcast, where I give you tips for your friends with scales and tails. I'm your host, QB. You probably already know that, but that is what it is. QB Tales and Scales, and that's where we are right now. So, anything anybody want to talk about before I get into the questions for the podcast for that I got via email? Crazy. My back is killing me. It's dusty in here, warm in here, but it is what it is. It's probably the dragon lights turned off about an hour ago, and it's still getting cooler as the time goes by. But it's probably, I want to say 75 in here, and I have a hoodie on because I had to walk from my house to here, which probably takes like a minute or so walking. It's probably like 300 feet or so, 200 feet, something like that. All right. So you already have a clutch, so you've already started breeding. Um, that is So we'll get into it when we get to the questions, but that is essentially what happens a lot. People have breeding plans after the fact, and they are hoping to get insight on what to do with their babies and how to value their babies, and that happens a lot. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just saying it happens a lot, and unfortunately, um, usually that's where people fail because now they're trying to figure out how much to sell something for. Sometimes they undervalue themselves, sometimes they overvalue themselves, sometimes they undervalue to the point where they don't make any money by selling, and sometimes they overvalue to the point where they don't sell anything. So definitely gonna have to tell you to get on the Patreon because there's a lot that goes into it, and it's just there's a lot that goes into it, and there's no way I can answer all your questions today because I don't know everything that I need to know in order to answer the questions. Like I said, just get on the Patreon, and there you go. The next person here says, "I want to start breeding, but I'm saving up for my next male or female. I need a het hypo translucent, so het translucent." And you messaged me, so I already told you. You know, I'm gonna have some. You said you wanted reds, so I'm gonna have some. The first clutch that's gonna hatch this season, which is probably like a month away now, maybe. They're going to have it's only 5 eggs because the female laid a bunch of duds, but there's gonna be reds in there that are double het or visual hets or something like that because it's a possible double het to a hypotrans. So I'm not. It's gonna be essentially there's a very good chance there's gonna be male or female het hypo het translucent. And next, so going back to you, you're not doing it for the money. You want to perfect it, want a beautiful bearded dragon. I completely understand. And while nobody essentially gets into this for the money, a lot of people get into it thinking that they're going to be able to enjoy it. And essentially, what happens is nobody enjoys it because they lose money in the process. So even though you're not in it for the money, you're going to lose money if you're not in it for the money. If that makes sense, because we're going to get into it. Let's just some of these questions are already touching the topics that I want to talk about. So let's just get into it. We've already been at it almost 10 minutes now. So let's get into the questions. And hopefully that answers a few of the questions you already have because, yeah, you got just, I'm telling you, get on the Patreon. It's going to make things a lot easier. Just get on the Patreon, watch a few videos that I have for members only, and that'll answer a lot of your questions. And then any questions you already don't have answered, you can always just reach out. Even if you're not into it for the money, you don't want to also lose a bunch of money in the process. I promise you, it's happened to a lot of people, and it will always continue to happen to people because they start off doing things the wrong way. And I'm not saying you're doing it the wrong way, but I'm just saying that it could lead to potentially doing it the wrong way. So here we go. I'm telling you, my back is killing me, y'all. So let me go ahead, share this banner. For anyone that ever wants to ask any questions live, don't hesitate. send an email to info at QB Sales and Scales with the subject being podcast questions, and I'll answer them live on the podcast. So, as you've seen, this is episode 2, or as if you heard, it says it on. Does it say it on the? It might say it on the title of the video, but it's episode 2. I'm gonna try to do these every 2 weeks. I'm gonna try to make them about an hour long. So there you go. That's the standard for right now. Every 2 weeks, about an hour. So let's go do the first question. All right. And this is going to touch a lot of, hopefully not make anybody mad, but you'll get to it. We'll get to it all of it. It all ties in together a little bit. I'm trying to, I set these questions up in a way where they segue with each other. So this first one says, a breeder I know thinks prices will drop for bearded dragons. What do you think? So when I started getting bearded dragons in 2011, 2012, bearded dragons, hypo bearded dragons used to be about $200. Adults would always be more expensive. Females or males didn't matter at the time. Adults were always more expensive. Baby bearded dragons essentially were always about $50 to $100, and that's essentially what you still see nowadays. Normal-ish babies are still $50 to $100, so the prices haven't changed at all in a decade and a half, essentially. And when we look at other things that we have in bearded dragons, let's talk about a newer morph or newish morphs, wiblets and zeros. Wiblets and zeros, they have always been holding steady in value. Whenever wiblets and zeros came out, you could find, let's see, the first wiblets I ever bought was a male leatherback wiblets het hypo, and I bought him for $650. This was probably like 2015, 2015, 2014, around that time. And 650 for a wiblets leatherback het hypo. Right now, you can find a wiblets for about $200. But if you want a nicer colored wiblets, you can find those for about $400 to $600. So what happened with wiblets, because wiblets do retain color, the value didn't necessarily go down, but the quality went up. So the ones that were lower quality, those were the ones that went down in value. And for zeros essentially just became, it was more of a demand, supply demand situation. More people are producing zeros now. So zeros, while they used to be 600, $800, now they're not that price. They're more about 300, $400. Some of them being $500, depending on the morphs that are in that zero. So if you have a hypo leatherback zero, you're probably spending $500 on that one, 450, something like that. And if you have one that's translucent, if you have one that also has dunner, you're probably looking at $650, $700 for one with all of those morphs. So really, when you look at the value of dragons, they haven't really gone down at all. Almost every single bearded dragon that's been around for a while, or bearded dragon morph that's been around for a while, has held value. Now, I know people think the people that ask this question, the people that think values are going to go down, are the people that breed red monsters. Because the people that breed red monsters, they bought red monsters whenever they were at the peak of value, whenever they were selling for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and essentially that led to people losing money, because you bought, let's say, several people bought, several red monsters. Let's say they bought 5 red monsters, or 6 red monsters. Let's say they bought 2 males and 4 females, and they spent $15,000 on 6 red monsters. Well, in order for you to make $15,000 off 6 red monsters, you have to produce red monsters from every baby, or from every pairing, right? So that has 4 females. Let's say they lay 20 eggs 2 times, so that's 60 or 40 eggs. Some of them lay 4 clutches, 3 clutches, but let's just go with the averages. So 40 eggs per female. You're looking at 160 baby red monsters. By the time you're able to breed a red monster, let's say they bought them as babies 2 years ago when they were really expensive. Now they're finally able to breed them. You can find red monsters on Morph Market right now for what, $500. I've seen some as low as $250. But those, so the thing about red monsters, and I always talk about red monsters, and I apologize for people that breed red monsters. And I'm not, you know, I'm not picking on anybody. I know there's people that are doing it right, and I'm not saying this situation belongs to any particular breeder out there, or it's being done by any particular breeder out there. But people, whenever they breed red monsters, they realize that some red monsters do not thrive as well as the others, and those are the ones being sold for as cheap as possible. Those are the ones being sold for 250. Those are the ones being sold as pet only. And obviously, somebody that wants a red monster, they're not going to spend $1,000 on a pet only red monster. And the people that are selling them for $1,000, now you're competing against everyone else selling them for $1,000, and everyone that's competing at the $1,000 price range is also dropping it down to compete with the values. And essentially, with there's probably 20, 30 breeders that are doing red monsters right now, so it's a lot. And they're always going to continue lowering the price to compete with each other, because that's once you spend 15 grand on something, you're going to hope to get your money back. So, all right, so here we go. In my opinion, every single baby bearded dragon that you sell is going to cost you, with supplies, with feed costs, and everything else. You're probably going to be spending 50 to $100 on every single baby bearded dragon, which means every single baby bearded dragon you have to at least sell for over $100 to make your money back. If you're selling them for 250, if you're selling them for 500, you're already gaining some funds there. The problem with red monsters is, I did say that there's 100 and 160 babies. With red monsters, there's always the failure to thrive. Not every baby makes it, and it's very common in red monsters. It's not as common in other pairings of bearded dragons, but it's very common in red monsters. I'm not exactly sure what the ratio is, but I know when the red monsters first came to the US and people started breeding them, it was about 50% of the babies didn't make it. I'm not sure what the ratio is now. I know people are still complaining about that. I don't know. Like I said, what is the ratio now? That's a good question. I don't know. But let's say it is 50%. Out of 160, you have 80 because of failure to thrive. And that's a perfect scenario. And if you're only making, I don't know, what did I say? 250 if it's pet only, 500 if it's not. Let's say you're making 400 off of 80. You're looking at what, 32 grand? That's very good. Out of 50, you put $15,000 in, you're making 32 grand. That's really good. Congratulations. Well, now you got to pay taxes, which is about 30%. So you probably lose, $8,000 right there, maybe $9,000 or something like that right there. Um, yeah. So you spend 15 grand, and that's just on the dragons. That's not all the supplies you had to get. I mean, you're probably spending another $2,000, $3,000 on supplies just to house these dragons. And feeding them and everything for the 2 years while you're getting them to breeding size, you're probably breaking even after that first year. Now you're probably wondering, well, that's just year number one. What about year number two? What about year number three? The values of red monsters have continuously gone down. Will they stay around $500? Who knows? I'm not really sure. If this is the plateau where everything is going to settle, it could just stay at $500. But the thing about red monsters is they're not the best reds. They're the deepest reds. They're the darkest reds, but they're not the best reds. There's some beautiful cherry reds out there. There's some beautiful, nice apple red colored dragons out there that people prefer over red monsters. But red monsters is the craze right now. Red monsters is what people want, and that's essentially why there is such a demand for them, and that's why so many people think they have to supply that demand by becoming a red monster breeder, which is why the red monster breeders are becoming more and more. Even the people that say they would never breed red monsters are breeding red monsters. I'm still not. I'll keep strong on that until the red monster bloodline is pretty much thin, and essentially you're only pairing dragons that look like red monsters, but they actually are not, because they've been outcrossed so much. So at that point, they're not even considered red monsters. Um, Hopefully that answered that question. Prices will not go down. Prices have been holding steady for a very long time, and I do not see them going down at all. I mean, honestly, if you go on Morph Market right now, Morph Market probably has, what did I say? I think last week there was about 600 or something on Morph Market. Let me tell you what it is this, not last week, last session. 417. So it's literally holding steady, and new dragons are getting added all the time. So it's crazy how fast these dragons sell. To be honest, and most of them are not red monsters that are selling. That's why the value of red monsters go down, because people people are not idiots, you know. So once people start doing their research, not I'm saying like 70% of the people out there do their research. And that means 70% of the customers you have are doing their research and are realizing that other people are complaining about red monsters too. They're not gonna buy a red monster. They're gonna stay away from it. And I have literally seen people give away red monsters at reptile expos because these animals were not growing, and therefore there's no reason for them to sell them, so they just gave them away. And there's no reason for them to keep them because it cost them money, so they just gave them away. I've literally seen that with my eyes. I was literally present at that show as a vendor, and somebody walked up to me and said, "Hey, look at this dragon I got." And I said, "Oh, how much you pay for it? 500 bucks?" And she goes, "No, it was free." And I was freaking shook of free, a free $500 to $1,000 bearded dragon, and that's the reason because it wasn't growing. It probably was sick, whatever the case may be. The breeder didn't want to deal with it anymore, and he just gave it away for free. And that's essentially why prices go down because people find out that there's something wrong with that lineage or that morph. And so, what was it? There was a morph a long time ago. Not a long time ago. I feel like it's been forever. So Dunners, when I first started buying Dunners were about uh, how much were Dunners? I think they were about 500 bucks. They were pretty significant. People really like Dunners because of their pattern changing, their scale changing, and everything else that went into them. But quickly, people realized they had issues and they were inbred and all that, and the value started going down pretty quickly. And you actually see the same thing in ball pythons. And I know there's not a nobody asked about ball pythons here, but the same thing happened in ball pythons when the banana morph came out. The banana morph essentially in ball pythons, there it's a sex link. It's not really sex link, but it has some issues essentially with males. Females are the best banana ball pythons. But if you get a male, there's males that are female makers and males that are male makers. When bananas first came out, they were like 40, $50,000 because nobody's ever seen anything like that. It was the best looking snake they've seen. It was colorful and everything. Then they started figuring out that the males would only produce one gender, and most of them were producing males because they came from a male. Um, because essentially, when you want to breed, if you want to breed for a new morph, you hold back males and hold back females, but the males breed first. So essentially, the males are producing more males, and yeah, and they started going down quickly in value. And now you can find a banana for 100 bucks. And I don't know how long banana came out in ball pythons because I haven't been breeding ball pythons that long, but that's essentially how that works. And people will always deal with the same thing when a new morph comes out or a new lineage or something comes out that looks, uh, you know, outrageously cool. They always sell very highly, and then the prices start dropping when people start realizing stuff is wrong with them, and then the prices plateau when everybody starts breeding them. So since there's so many breeders right now, I think the price is going to be about 500 bucks for a red monster, just because of how many breeders there are right now, and the price has been steadily staying around 500 bucks, $1,000. Um, and eventually, I think everything's going to be 500 bucks for a red monster. The other thing I want to talk about is thunderbolts. Thunderbolts is another morph, and I don't know why I'm trying to. So I don't have the screen up, so I'm trying to look at my phone for the YouTube, and it keeps turning off. But essentially, Thunderbolts is the other thing. Whenever Thunderbolts came out, $1,000 is $1,500 easily, and they still sell pretty good, like 750, $1,000 bucks. But the thing about Thunderbolts is people have started realizing that Thunderbolts, you don't even have to have a Thunderbolt to produce a Thunderbolt. You just have to have two genetic stripes to have translucent in them, and essentially the people that were buying them for 750, $1,000 bucks, $1,500 bucks, they were also breeders. And then they realized, oh, that's all it takes. Well, I'm not gonna, spend $1,500 for a Thunderbolt when I can easily buy a translucent or a het translucent genetic stripe for 250. So it was a lot of dropping in price there. And now people are also, if you guys have watched my YouTube videos for a while, you have seen that I talk about how genetic stripe is polygenic and it's not a co-dominant or incomplete dominant, depending on who you are. People call it different things. And therefore, Thunderbolts is not a super genetic stripe. It's therefore just a genetic stripe that is an extreme genetic stripe, not super. Because I did pair my Thunderbolt to a non-genetic stripe and got a good variety of different things, not just genetic stripes. So therefore, that's kind of axing that entire hypothesis people had. So that price has gone down a little bit too. All right. The next thing is continuing the money train. What's the most amount of money you have ever spent on a dragon? The most amount of money I have ever spent on a dragon. Um, I think the Wiro I bought, I don't remember exactly how much I spent on him. I just know he was expensive. I know he was like $1,000 or $1,500 or something like that. He was a Hypo Wiro. 2021, I think is when I bought him. He produced, I want to say 3 clutches for me, and here he is, Hypo Wiro. So Wiro is one of these things people are still trying to figure out. Not breeders per se, but people that are buying bearded dragons are still trying to figure out what a Wiro is. A lot of people at first thought it was a new morph. It's not a new morph. It's Zero and Wiblets in the same dragon. Essentially, not really sure how it came to be, who decided to make a Zero Wiblets. But that's essentially what a Wiro is, a Zero Wiblets. It's a Wiblet Zero, same thing, whatever, whichever way you want to say it. It is essentially a Zero with Wiblets, and it doesn't make it look any different. Now, this guy here in these pictures, he was going into shed, and therefore he does have some yellow tones on him, but essentially a Hypo Wiro, it's the whitest dragon you can find. Like there's no other, like you typically with zeros, they are white, but they also turn gray, and they can also be gray most of the time. And I have a Zero, she's gray most of the time. But this Hypo Wiro, you put him next to that Zero, and he looks almost paper white compared to the Zero. So right now you can probably find a Wiro for about 750, $1,000. Back then I want to say he was about $1,500, and that was 2021. That was the most expensive dragon I ever bought. But the most expensive dragon I ever sold was my Paradox Mancha. Mancha just actually means blotch in Spanish. For anyone that speaks Spanish, hopefully you understood. But yeah, it's Mancha was a Paradox that I sold. I had him listed for 2 grand, and it took a while to sell him, but he sold all blue ones, all blue dragons. Like, what do you mean all blue? Ever come across all blue or any all blue? No, that I don't know what you mean by all blue, because the only blue bearded dragons out there are tigers, and they are not all blue. They're mostly colored, but their back is where the blue is from the tiger markings. I got gnats in here. I got gnats in here from the snakes. They always get gnats. I always have to, every few months I got to put some gnat traps out here, and they're all in front of me, of course. Let's see some of the comments. Somebody saying they have a 25-inch bearded dragon that they paired to a 22-inch bearded dragon. 25 inches is long, so, but it's not a German giant. It's just a very long bearded dragon. Maybe has German giant lineage in it, but it's not a German giant. But 25 inches is pretty massive. The biggest dragon I've ever owned was 23 inches, so that one's pretty massive. Yeah, but going back to this, all blue. The only way you see all blue is if you look for um, blue barring or tiger, and typically that means that they have mostly color everywhere else except for their back, and their back is where they see the tiger markings. Let's go back. All right. Next, will you be getting any yellows this year? I'll put the hashtag make hashtag make yellow dragons great again. So yellows. The other thing about bearded dragons right now, so red monsters, they have come down in value. And the reason being is because everybody's breeding for red monsters. Yellow bearded dragons, on the other hand, have actually gone up in value a little bit because they're being not bred. They're harder to find. So people still like yellow bearded dragons, and honestly, I think they're liking yellow bearded dragons more and more now because they're actually not like what everybody else has. So people used to want reds because every dragon was either orange or yellow, and then reds got popular, and now everybody wants red or yellows. So now everybody wants yellows, and that's essentially why yellows have gone up in value a little bit. You can find nice yellows for about 300 bucks. Nice yellows. Maybe I've seen some for like 600 bucks. So nice yellows are honestly in some cases getting more money than red monsters are. And I have always been a fanatic of yellow bearded dragons, and I have the only so I think I want to say whenever I sold everything in 2018, I probably had I want to say maybe 5 yellows, and it was 1 male and 4 females, but the females weren't all breeding. Some of them were still too young, but essentially, that's what I had back then. And when I started breeding again in 2021, 2020, um, I actually noticed that there was not that many yellows around, so I couldn't find yellows to breed, essentially. So that's essentially what I dealt with, and all the yellows that were being sold out there were coming from the same people. So the yellows that were back then, all the yellows were coming from Spain, or they were coming from 2 breeders here in the U.S., which was um, I want to. It's not technically 2 breeders, but they all carry the same lineage. So CCD or Carolina Classic Dragons, before they sold, all the yellows came from him or Tammy or Mike at uh, Kids and Dragons. I can't even think now, and Phantom Dragons, but they all share lineage essentially. So that's why I'm saying that they're all. It was hard to essentially buy yellow bearded dragons because they all kind of were related. But after a while now, yellows have kind of come back now, and I can start buying yellows again. But I still face the same issues. Are they related to my yellows? And I said this in the last podcast, but I was trying to buy some yellows last year, and I sold some yellows. I think I want to say 2023, and they were circulating around, and eventually made it to one of the breeders I was trying to buy a yellow from. And I asked them the question. They were like, "Yeah, sure enough, the yellow was related to the yellows I have." So I couldn't even buy yellows from them, and that kind of sucked. But it is what it is. That's kind of where we are as of right now, due to the red monster craze, kind of killed off the yellows a little bit. Not necessarily killed them off, but it made them slow down. So the people that had the yellows weren't breeding the yellows; they were breeding the reds, and the yellows are kind of an afterthought. And eventually, they started getting too old to breed, and now you have to work with what you got. So retired bearded dragons are what we're dealing with now. There's a lot of nice yellows out there, but they're too old to breed. So that's kind of sucks. So somebody's asking how much is a red monster. Um, I guess you probably got here late, maybe. A red monster is about 250 to 1,000 bucks. It's a huge range right now, and that's because they are heavily bred. So too many people are breeding it, and therefore are that's causing a lot of issues in terms of competition. And people are going down in value to compete with other people, and essentially now you're dealing with overproduction and not as much demand. So that's why the prices keep coming down because people are competing in order to sell. All right. Next question. Also, here are all the yellows I got last year. So I did get a bunch of yellows last year. I want to say these. There's probably more than what's in this picture. I probably got like 3 or 4 more than what's in this picture. But these 3 here are related. This one and this one is related, and this one is related to one of the ones I have already. So they're all still technically kind of related to each other. Um, This was related to Zinnia. I showed her in my last podcast. These 3 are related, like I said, and these 2 are related. So it's going to be hard to find essentially breeding pairs because Zinnia produced my male, and I had to buy another male in order to get all of these females, or at least this female, someone else to pair with. And that's kind of what I'm dealing with is trying to find males and trying to find females that are not related. Because, like I said, a lot of them are closely related. All right. Thoughts on people who race dragons outdoors. So this is honestly, if I lived in a place where it was warm all the time, I would do the same thing. there is nothing wrong with raising your dragons outdoors. Whenever I lived in Florida for about 10 months. My dragons were outside all of the time. The worst thing about them being outside is if they get out, they get out because they're out. So if they get out of where you have them, they're gone. And it could be a predator taking them out. It could be that they snuck out somehow. Maybe they dug a hole real deep and they got out to the other side. Who knows what happened? But that's essentially it happened to me once. I had a dragon get out, and I don't remember exactly how long he was out for. It was probably a month. I had already forgot about him, to be honest. I had already told myself he's gone. There's nothing I can do about it, and he was gone. I want to say like a month, and then one day he came out of under the shed, and the dogs were sniffing at him, and I'm over here like, what are the dogs sniffing at over there? What are they playing with? And sure enough, it was the bearded dragon that I lost a month ago, and I put him back in there. After he had gotten out, I had put some mesh down underneath the ground so if they dug, they couldn't get out. So that was essentially my lesson learned right there. But there was when I put him back in, he never got out again. So there was probably, I want to say, 10 bearded dragons that I had outdoors, and the rest were indoors in the shed because that's where I kept the babies and the growing dragons because I didn't want them getting out, sneaking out through the mesh of the chicken wire. So yeah, people keeping them outside, that's great. I mean, everybody in Florida and I think California and stuff like that, those people, Texas, they keep them outdoors and it works great. The first person I ever saw keeping bearded dragons outdoor was Heather from Fairy Tale Dragons, and she actually has a. If you go on Dave Kaufman's YouTube channel, he actually has a documentary where he talks to her. It's like an hour long, but he goes through her setups and everything, and shows you how she does her outdoor setups. Which I think Ron, is it Ron? I don't know if it was Ron, but one of the people that used to breed bearded dragons in Florida, which now I think they've gone to like iguanas and chameleons and stuff like that. Um, they actually helped her create those outdoor enclosures, and like I said, they work really good. And I don't think she's ever complained about anything getting out. And even when it's cold in Florida, which it can get cold, but in most non-extreme weather, it's probably 50 degrees at night, so they can handle it. And I think she keeps the babies inside. So same thing that I was doing was keeping the babies inside, adults outside, and but yeah, they can handle a little bit better than the babies can. So keeping them outdoors is perfectly fine. I think if you can, there's no problem doing it. I would prefer it. It's easier to clean outdoors than it is to clean inside of an enclosure. The next question we have here is: do you ever feed your dragons eggs, flowers, or pinkies? All right. I assume by eggs you mean like chicken eggs, but no, I've never fed them chicken eggs. I've never fed them flowers. I have fed them their own eggs. So if my female bearded dragon lays in fertile clutches, I will feed them right back to her because when she lays eggs, that means all of the nutrients that she used up to lay those eggs are now exiting her body. The eggs carry protein, calcium, fat, and everything else. Feed them right back. If she eats them, feed them right back to the female. So dragon eggs, I fed dragon eggs. Chicken eggs, never fed chicken eggs. Never fed flowers and pinkies. Yeah, I give them pinkies. I especially give them pinkies after they lay a clutch because pinkies are jam packed with fat, and that's essentially what they need after they lay. They need to bulk up their weight because they just laid a clutch of eggs and they are exhausted and they got everything out of them taken out. All that fat, all that protein, all that calcium is gone. So pinkies, huge boost of fat, huge boost of calcium from the bones and everything. So pinkies are really good for laying female bearded dragons. So usually you give it to them once a month, and I even give them pinkies whenever they wake up from brumation because they are essentially also lacking some nutrients because they've been asleep for a while. So it really just depends on if you're comfortable doing that. Some people do not like feeding their dragons pinkies. Some people don't like feeding their snakes live rats. Some people prefer doing it way different than I do it. That's perfectly fine. Whatever works for you. So I think if you find yourself in a situation where your dragon needs to gain weight because it got sick and now it's not sick anymore, pinkies. You can do honestly, I do rat pinkies because that's what I have available. But a rat pinky is no not much bigger. It is bigger than a mouse pinky, but it's not much bigger to the point where a bearded dragon can't eat it. A rat pinky is still probably um, it's probably a little bit longer than the width between the eyes, but they don't eat them long ways. They eat them short ways. They eat them head first normally, so it's pretty easy to gobble down. This sounds pretty terrible. People probably like, "Oh, he's talking about eating a rat pinky, gobble it down." But it is what it is. You have to. I mean, they have to eat, so um, it's just much better than giving them a bunch of bugs. I promise you that because it's going to take a lot of bugs to get them to the nutrients that they're getting from a pinky. All right. Next question. Smallest adult dragon you have. The smallest adult dragon I have. Um, Technically, he's a subadult, but he's about 15 inches. He's still growing. The smallest adult dragon I've ever owned was a female. She was 16 inches, maybe 17 inches. I'm trying to remember now. She was either 16, 17 inches or something like that, which is rather small for a bearded dragon. I think the average size is about 18 to 20 inches. So 16, 17 is on the smaller side of a bearded dragon. And she actually laid clutches for me back to back nonstop. She was the best layer. Unfortunately, the problem with that is I paired her to a male where I was lied about his genetics and she just kept laying eggs and I couldn't ever get caught up with trying to find a male that actually worked for her. So I bought a male. I tried pairing him, and she just kept laying eggs from the last male because she was retaining sperm, and it was just terrible. So she probably laid 6 clutches from that male, and it was just a bunch of eggs, a bunch of babies that I did not need because if honestly, if he would have been the genetics that he was, I would not be sitting here right now doing this podcast because I would be paying somebody else to do that podcast. It was literally in the height of everybody doing nope. So everybody was selling wiblets, everybody was selling zeros, but nobody was selling Weeros. There was probably 2 or 3 people selling Weeros in the United States, and that was what this pairing was. It was a het Weero to a het Weero, and somebody lied to me about the male being a het Weero, so I got no wiblets, no zeros, nothing out of them, and 6 clutches she laid, and almost every single clutch was over 20 eggs. She gave me three, oh, like what? I mean, I think she almost gave me like 200 eggs total herself over the course of a year and a half because she actually went into brumation, then laid eggs again after she got out of brumation from the same male. It was crazy. So 200 eggs and almost I think 1 in 8 every 1 in 8 would have been a Wero. So that would have put me at what 30 20, 30 Weros, selling them at 1,500, $2,000 a piece. Um, that was just 2021, so I would have continued doing that until today, and it would have been a lot more than I got because of that pairing. But it is what it is, lesson learned. But she was the smallest female, and I actually still have a female. I kept one from her, and she is one of my longest females actually because the male that I paired her to was the 23-inch male and she's probably 20, 19, 20 inches. So she is one of my longer females. So she's actually, and she's also pretty mean, but that's besides the point. She got her dad's attitude and her dad's size almost. But yeah, she was 19, 20 inches, or is 19, 20 inches. She's pretty nice. Um, she is het zero, um, possible het wiblets. I have to pair her to a het wiblet still to figure out if she is in fact, Het Wiblet, but she has produced zeros for me. I paired her to a Het Zero, got zeros. I did not get any Wiblets from that pairing. It wasn't for Wiblets, it was for zeros, and she did give me zeros, but now I have to figure out if she's Het Wero or just Het Zero. And let's see, got some questions on the chat. Let's answer. So somebody said, so how do you stay afloat? I stay afloat by selling bearded dragons and snakes. Um, that's the only way. That's the only way because like I said, every bearded dragon you're probably spending 50 to $100 every single time. So every bearded dragon you sell has to be over 50 to $100. And if you don't sell one for over $100, let's say you sell it for 75 or $50 because it's a normal, and you lose money on that one, you hope to make it on the other ones that you're selling for $200. So that's essentially how that works. You may lose on some bearded dragons, you may gain on some bearded dragons, but at the end of the day, you want to overall gain on the clutch because the clutch is not only paying for the clutch's nutrients and the clutch's supplies, but it's also paying for the parents' supplies and nutrients. So the food, the calcium, the UVB, the heat, everything else, the babies are paying for them too. Because whenever you invest in two bearded dragons to breed, you're not going to get your money back from those bearded dragons. You're going to get your money back from the babies that those bearded dragons produce. So, like I said, those bearded dragon babies have to pay for themselves, pay for their parents, pay for the supplies, pay for the food, everything that goes into it. So that's essentially how you stay afloat. Stay afloat by self. That's the only way. I mean, I do YouTube, and YouTube, I I probably get paid like every 2 months. It has to be over $100 to get paid. So you can tell I'm doing great. I know I'm doing. YouTube's not paying me that much, but essentially that's the YouTube honestly pays for the website. So YouTube pays me every 2 months $100, and my website costs like I want to say $30 every month. So that's $60 right there. And then the marketing, I do email marketing, and that costs $15 a month. So that's $30 right there. That's $90 right there, and YouTube is paying for that. So right now, YouTube is just sustaining the marketing side of the business, and the dragons are sustaining the animal side of the business. Now, the ball pythons, on the other hand, the ball pythons are a little bit easier to sustain themselves because I breed rats. I have actually started breeding roaches. Um, so I did a video, I want to say about a year ago, where I created a dubia colony. I have 4 dubia colonies now. Um, they're steadily growing. They eat a lot. they they cost a lot of money to feed, and I have not started feeding from them yet because I want them to grow to a point where I can sustain my bearded dragons from it. I probably spend maybe $1,500 on dubia roaches whenever it's breeding season. So you have to make that money back. There's only one way to make that money back, and that's by selling bearded dragons. So if you're not making $1,500 off of your bearded dragons in a month, probably not gonna like what you're doing, and that's how people end up selling entire collections to get out of it. And that's essentially what I did in 2018. Not because of the funds or anything. It was mainly because of just it was just not the right time for me. I had to move, and it was just going to be too much to do, and I wasn't going to be able to breed in the move. I wasn't going to be able to do anything. Everything was in brumation. It was just a lot of work, and I just decided to sell everything. So that's what people do. It's a lot of work, and eventually they decide to sell everything. So how do you stay afloat? By doing this much as much possible as you can without burning yourself out, without taking all of your funds because you don't want to, pour thousands of dollars of your money into it just so you can produce something that you like. That sounds, I hate to say it, but that's kind of backwards because if you're just going to put $1,000 into something to produce an animal that's $300, you should have just bought that animal for $300. If you're going to put $5,000 into something just to produce an animal that's $2,000, you should have just bought the $2,000 animal. Oh, well, I didn't have the money right then and there, so it was easier to breed for it and pay it over time. Yeah, that sounds still backwards because you could have saved up for that animal and it would have been less money. So it is what it is, but that's just how that works. And then will you be at the reptile show the 16th? I will not be at the reptile show on the 16th. I have officially sold almost all of my 2024 babies. I have one bearded dragon baby left to sell and no ball python babies left to sell. I take that back. I have 2 ball python babies left to sell, but I'm not in a rush to sell them because they were holdbacks initially. And if they don't sell, they're just going to be breeders later on. So technically they're for sale, but technically they don't have to sell. But the one that I had to sell is sold, and the bearded dragon that is left to sell has not sold. But I'm not going to set up at a show for one bearded dragon. Let's see. All right, all right, all right. Next question. Are there any bearded dragon community mysteries? This is actually the last question. And community mysteries, not necessarily. The mysteries per se are the fact that there is so much drama in the bearded dragon community. And you would think that so many people having something in common would not be as dramatic as they are. But the problem with people is that they always want to be the smartest at everything, the best at everything, and they just essentially it's always a competition to make sure that the information that you have and the information that you're giving out is the best information, and only your information should be that information. And I hate to say it, but it is how it is. If you go on any bearded dragon Facebook group, you will see people telling people in the comment section, "You're wrong. You're an idiot. I can't believe you said that. Why would somebody say that?" And I have caught myself doing this sometimes because there is there is times out there where somebody will say, "What kind of bearded dragon do I have?" And it'll just be a picture of a normal, but you'll see people in the comments saying, "Oh, that's a translucent. Oh, that's a dunner. Oh, that's a leatherback." These are obvious morphs that people can clearly see just by looking at the pictures, and therefore, it should not be that hard to determine if you have one or not, especially for a person that's asking the question. Why don't they just Google it? You would be able to see every single morph on Google. What's a dunner look like? Boom. What's a leatherback look like? Boom. What's a translucent look like? Boom. You would have all of those answers before you go on Facebook and people start calling you an idiot because you have a normal and you should have done your research before you bought it. Or people tell you the wrong answer and you believe it, and now you are telling everybody you have a translucent leatherback dunner when all you have is the normal. Like that's ridiculous. So in terms of mysteries, there's no mysteries. The mystery is that people are idiots and everybody is out there believing everybody, and there's people thinking they're smarter than others even though they're giving people wrong information. You know, it's funny. I got kicked out of a Facebook group last year. I think it was last year because there was somebody asking how much should my bearded dragon be eating. And there was a person in the comment section saying your bearded dragon should be eating 3 to 5 bugs a day. 3 to 5 bugs a day. Now you may think, well, that's pretty normal amount for an adult bearded dragon. Absolutely, for an adult bearded dragon. But this was a baby they were asking about. And 3 to 5 bugs a day is not going to sustain any individual baby. And then people wonder, why is my baby not growing? Why is my bearded dragon 6 months old and still looks like it's 20 grams, 30 grams, 40 grams, whatever the case may be? And that's because of these people out there telling people you need to start feeding your bearded dragon 3 to 5 bugs every day. That is not a good number. 10 to 15 is a better number. Um, and I was telling them, I said, no, you should do 10 to 15, and it should be appropriate size bugs. So based off the size of their head, you should feed them. Um, do not feed them smalls just because they're cheaper. Do not feed them largest just because you don't have to feed as many. Feed them the appropriate size, the appropriate number, and it will grow at a good rate. That's simply all you have to do. And yeah, I got kicked out of the group because I said that. Because I was only supposed to say the industry standard of 3 to 5 bugs, which is I don't know where somebody got this expert idea of the industry standard being 3 to 5 bugs. That is outrageous. I would never recommend anybody ever eat 3 to 5 bugs of not anybody ever feed their bearded dragon 3 to 5 bugs a day unless they're an adult. And even for adults, I try to space it out to where they're only eating greens every day, and then on the weekends is when I'm feeding them their bugs. So because then you get spoiled dragons that only want to eat bugs. So, um, oh, that's a lot. They must be. I assume they must be smaller dubious and smaller worms because unless you're saying you split them up by the for the two, so that would be 10 to 15 per baby. Unless is that what you're saying, or are you saying you feed them 20, 30 per baby? Because I think that's a lot. And there's people that say that's not a lot because they have 6 month old bearded dragons that are 300 grams. Oh yeah, each that's a lot. Unless they're smaller, dubious. I mean, have no idea what size your bearded dragons are. I have no idea what size the dubia roaches are, so I can't say if that's too much, not enough. Because if you say your bearded dragon is 80 grams, and you're feeding them smalls or mediums, that 20-30 is perfectly fine. But if your bearded dragon is 30 grams and it's eating 20-30 smalls, then that's a lot. So I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, it's too much for my male. He is getting fat, and that's exactly what will happen. They will get fat. They will get obese, and you know, it's not like you can go to the gym with a bearded dragon and make him lose weight. So it's going to be impossible for him to not get fat after. Um, so you have to literally do the bare minimum now, so that fat can be burned off somehow. And being a male, you don't want your males fat. If you plan on breeding, I think you did say you were planning on breeding. Um, Male bearded dragons that are oversized breed the worst. They are sluggish, they are lazy, and they will potentially not even breed. So that's another thing people should look out for. They want their bearded dragon to be big as fast as possible so they can breed them as fast as possible. That's the wrong thing to do because you'll end up with a bunch of dud adults because they're overweight and they are lazy, and you don't want that. I have no more questions. So if you guys have anything on the chat, we can go through the chat, do some stuff, talk about some stuff. If you want to see something, let me know. I'll go get it. We got at least 4 minutes before it's the hour mark, and then after that, if I'm still talking, then I'll continue talking. But at the hour mark, if we got nothing else to talk about, then I'll just head off. And I think too many people are watching the Super Bowl and not watching me, so that is what it is. So for the people that are on here watching me, don't forget to hit that like button, smash that like button, share it, do what you got to do because obviously all these people are missing out because they're all watching the Super Bowl, and I'm not watching the Super Bowl. Honestly, I could care less who wins, but surely there's somebody out there that's revolving their life. Make yellows great again. Yes, make yellow dragons great again. 100%. That's where we are right now. You know what? Um, 1 second. So I posted a picture of this dragon. I want to say either this morning or yesterday. This is the one that I said is from my smallest female, and if I don't know how well y'all can see this, I probably should have just. So she's at the tip of my finger. She goes past this crease where my elbow or my joint is, and I think that's probably. I don't have my tape measure in here, but I think that's probably 19 inches or so. And this female here is, if you look at her, she doesn't look like much right now because she was sleeping. But if you look at her, this is a citrus bearded dragon. She has orange our beard there, pretty much solid yellow. She's also translucent, so translucent makes yellows look a little bit more orange than they are supposed to. But that is how bearded dragons are. Asia still has yellows. Yeah, see, the thing about Asia, I don't trust anybody in Asia anymore. After the red monster fiasco, I think everybody out there is just inbreeding like crazy, and I'm not going to trust them to ever get anything from my breeding stock. Um, but this female here, actually, which nobody can ever tell just by looking at her, whenever I produced her, the mom of this female here, it was a hypo leatherback het trans het wero, and this female um, that appeared to have some kind of genetic striping. But back then, genetic stripes were anything that had stripes, whether it be um, jagged, whether it be bubbles and not 100% connecting stripes. Anything that had a stripe essentially would be considered a genetic stripe. Nowadays, that's not acceptable. Nowadays, all genetic stripes have to be super straight stripes or else, and that was not acceptable. The male, the dad to this female, which she looks almost similar to, he was a hypotransdunner genetic stripe. His stripe was also not super straight like people want them to be nowadays. Now, when I produced this female here, I actually ended up selling her, and the person that I sold her to ended up giving her back to me because his son no longer wanted the bearded dragons. His son wanted ball pythons. So it is what it is. It happens sometimes, but essentially, you can't really tell just by looking at her. But this is a hypotransdunner genetic stripe because they're there. I can see them faintly, and she has given me a clutch or two now, and they have been genetic stripes in there. So The problem is, like I said, the standard of genetic stripes have kind of changed over the couple years, and now people only want to say that a genetic stripe is a super straight stripe, which the people that have been breeding bearded dragons for so long will call a genetic stripe anything that has the tendency to produce genetic stripes or anything that came from a genetic stripe, and it looks like a stripe. So that's like I was talking. Let me put her back. Because I was talking to one of the breeders. I want to say probably 3 days ago. It was after my tiger video came out, and somebody was messaged me, and we were talking, and essentially we were talking about genetic stripes. We went from talking about tigers to talking about genetic stripes, and we were talking about how genetic stripes are not acceptable anymore the way they used to be, and it's kind of bizarre how that happened. And I was telling her that whenever I was selling genetic stripes last year from my Thunderbolts, and I was labeling some of them as genetic stripes, they were getting taken down from Morph Market because somebody kept reporting them. So essentially, I told her that, and she was like, "Well, that doesn't make any sense because a genetic stripe is not always a straight stripe. A genetic stripe is anything that came from a genetic stripe that looks like it has a stripe, and anything that came or anything that produces genetic stripes. So, because genetic stripe is polygenic and line bred, essentially you can have two dragons that do not have perfect genetic stripes produce a perfect genetic stripe. Because again, that's how line breeding works. You take two mediocre animals that display the trait, breed them together, you'll get some mediocre babies, but then you'll also get some extreme babies that have nice stripes. The same thing happens with tiger. That's essentially how we start getting on that topic. But that's the same thing that happens with tigers. You take two tigers that are mediocre, have some nice tiger marks, you put them together, you get some that are mediocre, and you get some that have a lot of tiger. And that's essentially how genetic stripes work, which is why we have now these super straight stripes because this happened so many times because everybody was breeding. Back then, nobody cared to breed genetic stripe to genetic stripe because back then people believed that it was incomplete dominant, um, and therefore they didn't care to produce genetic stripes. They knew that if they had one parent that had genetic stripes, they would start breeding them. The problem is Asia. In Asia, they started breeding genetic stripe to genetic stripe to get the best looking stripes, and eventually they created a Thunderbolt. And people assume that the Thunderbolts were all super genetic stripes, but obviously they are not because I have bred my Thunderbolt to a non-genetic stripe and got some normal stripes. Like I wouldn't even call them genetic stripes myself, but the person that I was talking to said, "Well, even if you look at the babies that you produced from that clutch, there was the majority of them had some kind of striping." So, and that's where line breeding comes in because of the Thunderbolt being such an extreme version of genetic stripe. Breeding it to a non-genetic stripe, every baby's going to have a version of genetic stripe, whether it be an extreme version, a not extreme version of genetic stripe. But that's what people are going to have, and that's essentially where we ended up on that topic. That people are being too picky nowadays on genetic stripe. So therefore, honestly, I think the same thing's going to happen to tiger because tiger, if you look at the way that's going, people are breeding tiger to make thicker tiger bars, and eventually people are going to say, well, this one here is not a tiger because the bars aren't an inch thick or half an inch thick. They're going to be super picky about the way that it is. Um, Asia done ruined us. I just got to say it. I heard some dragon breeders make 200K a year. 200K a year. Let's see, how much do you have to produce to get 200K a year? Well, if I do the math, and bearded dragons on average sell from $50 to $500, and let's say in between that we're looking at $300 a piece. Every dragon costs $100, $50 to $100 to feed. Let's say they're somehow finding a way to save all of the money. Let's do the calculations. They're getting $300 per dragon on average, with some of them being 1,000, some of them being $50, whatever the case may be. That means if they're only spending $50 to get the dragon to size to sell it, how much do you have to sell to get to $200,000? That is 800 baby bearded dragons. Is it possible? Absolutely. I By yourself? No, absolutely not by yourself. I produce over 200 by myself, and that's a daunting task. Like that's a lot to do for one person. If I had help, I could easily do 400, 500. But the problem is by yourself, it's so much work that it's honestly 200 by yourself is not a feasible task. But when you have help and someone can help you clean and someone can help you feed, the task now becomes less daunting because you can do the same amount in less time. So whenever I have 200 babies a year or something like that, and I said this in the last podcast, but I don't do, 20 females at once. I do 5 now, 5 later, 5 5 every quarter, let's say on average. So if I had 20 females to breed, I do 5 every quarter. Now the last quarter during brumation, some of them may be sleeping, so I may only do 15. So really you have to kind of eyeball it based off what the females will do. But yeah, so I'm not breeding 20 females all at once. I'm doing 5 at a time until I get to the point where I'm overwhelmed and then I'll stop. And that's essentially what happened last year. I didn't breed anything during the fall. I didn't do anything the third quarter or fourth quarter. So the second half of the year, because I was expecting a baby and I did not want to be overwhelmed while the baby was here, while we were waiting for the baby to get here, because there's a lot that goes into taking care of a baby. And I did not want to have to take care of baby dragons at the same time. So that's why I decided not to breed. But even last year, I did over 100, maybe like 120. Um, so let's see. This year, I have 3 clutches, and there's only 20 babies in 3 clutches. The first clutch was 20 eggs, 15 were duds, 5 were fertile. The 5 that were fertile from the first clutch have now gone, so they dried out. They are no longer they might have not been good to begin with. Maybe the female's eggs weren't perfect, so they didn't go any further. And then the second clutch, same thing, 17 eggs, only 5 were fertile. Why are so many infertile? Well, it had to do with timing. Sometimes when you time it wrong and you get females that are already developing the follicles and you put a male in there, the male could only inseminate so many eggs, so many follicles. So that's essentially what could potentially have happened. Then the third clutch was 15 eggs, all fertile. And this female is known to produce small clutches, but she always goes above and beyond, gives me 4 or 5 clutches every year. So it's not something that I was expecting her to do 30 eggs or something like that. And she always does this. This is her 4th year breeding for me, and this is all she always is. She always gives me about 60 babies every year, sometimes more. And this is a het wiblets clutch, so I usually all my wiblets usually come from her, and usually I have wiblets coming throughout the entire year from her because every 2 months I'm having more wiblets hatch because of her. So it's just a matter of timing for me. But 200K, very possible. If I had an extra 2 or 3 hands, I could potentially we 200K is easily possible. If you have to have the space, you have to have the help, you have to have somehow a way to cut your feeder costs. So with 800 babies, um, and you're doing $20 a day for 2 months, that is 1,200 bugs. That's 960,000 bugs that you have to feed a baby before you can sell it, and you can find them. Um, you can find bugs for 20K, 20,000 bugs, 50,000 bugs. I think the 20K is like 300 bucks, 400 bucks for smalls, and I think the 50K is more like $500. So let's say you're getting 50K at 500, you're spending 10 grand every month on or every year on feeding before you can sell them. That's before you can sell them. That's not talking about how long it takes you to sell them. So if you unless you have everything for sale as soon as you put it up, that's very impossible. But if you sell everything as soon as you put it up and it's available for sale, that's great. And you only spend 10 grand, on feeding them. But sometimes it takes you a little bit longer. Like I have these last few dragons that I had, I want to say they were 3, 4 months old by the time they sold. And they were still eating. They still got to eat, or else you can't sell them because they're not going to make it. So yeah, it's a matter of I probably those I probably spent more like $200 on them to feed them before I could sell them. and eventually you just have to cut your losses. Like the second to last one I sold, I just did an auction on her because she was just eating. She eats a lot. So I was like, I'm gonna do an auction. Whatever she sells for is whatever she sells for. Because if she doesn't sell anytime soon, then I'm gonna be losing money on her. And then the Wiblets always sell good. Wiblets and zeros, best selling things on the market. Better than red monsters, if you ask me, to be honest. Because there's less people doing Wiblets and zeros than they are doing red monsters. So you always have a better chance of selling a red monster based off or based better chance selling a Wiblet or a zero based off the supply and demand than you will a red monster. And I think nobody else is saying anything, and I'm gone over an hour now. So I think that's going to be it for me. I think we are at the finishing point. Hopefully, this was a good episode. I know there was a lot of questions that I took from the chat. There's some questions on the slides there. So all I got to say, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like the video, smash that like button. Share the video if you're interested in sharing. No benefit to you, but if you want to share the video, share the video. And thank you for tuning in. I always appreciate everybody. Um, yeah, send them questions via the email, man. I appreciate them. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for sharing the videos. Thank you for telling people about me. Thank you for supporting me. I know this is episode 2, and I always be saying thank you, so it's not really anything new for you all. But as always, I got to do it. Peace.